Why is it that the more you understand, the more alone you feel? It's not because you pushed people away. It's because you started seeing through them. The lies they tell themselves, the masks they wear, the distractions they cling to like lifelines. You stopped laughing at things that aren't funny. You stopped pretending you didn't see what was right in front of you, and in that clarity came distance. The room gets quieter when your mind gets louder. Conversations feel empty. Crowds feel suffocating. And suddenly, solitude becomes your sanctuary. People say you've changed. No, you've awakened. This isn't loneliness, it's evolution. And the deeper your mind goes, the harder it is to find someone who can follow. At first glance, it seems paradoxical. You'd think that understanding more would bring you closer to people. That knowledge would create bridges. That empathy would deepen your connections. But in truth, intelligence, especially the kind that leans toward introspection and pattern recognition, often does the opposite. It sharpens your vision to a point where you start to see through the surface, through the words, through the roles everyone is playing. You begin to understand people not for who they pretend to be, but for what they truly are. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. You start to recognize the lies people tell, not just to you, but to themselves. You see how often they choose comfort over truth, distraction over depth. You notice the repetition in their behavior, the patterns of self-sabotage, the way they cling to illusions just to survive another day. You understand why they do it. You even sympathize. But that understanding creates distance, not closeness, because while you can see them clearly, they can't see you at all. When your perception sharpens, small talk becomes unbearable. The endless loop of surface-level conversations, the mindless rituals, the fake laughter, it all begins to feel hollow. You're no longer able to nod along when someone's lying to themselves. You no longer find entertainment in gossip or comfort in conformity. You crave depth, but depth is rare, and the rarer your conversations become, the lonelier your world feels. You begin to recognize how much of society is built on illusions, social norms, cultural expectations, even success. So much of it is performative, and when you stop performing, when you step out of the script, people no longer know how to interact with you. You're not playing the same game anymore. You've become the observer rather than the participant, and observers don't fit into the system easily. Even friendships change. The ones that were built on shared confusion begin to dissolve when you outgrow the confusion. You see things now from a higher vantage point, and that perspective shifts your emotional reality. Things that once upset you no longer do. Goals that once seemed urgent no longer matter. People who once felt like home now feel like strangers. Not because they changed, but because you did. You stop relating to their fears. You stop reacting to their drama. You start choosing silence over arguments, solitude over noise. Not because you're bitter, but because peace becomes more important than attention. In that shift, your circle grows smaller. Your voice becomes quieter, but your mind, your awareness, it expands. And that expansion, that quiet rise in awareness, is what sets you apart. Not in arrogance, but in alienation. You're no longer one of them, and they feel it. Not because you said anything, but because your presence makes them uncomfortable. People sense when you see through them. They sense when you're no longer playing the same psychological games. And most of them aren't ready for that level of presence. With intelligence comes the ability to perceive, to analyze, and to question. It's not just about solving problems or acquiring knowledge. It's about seeing things that others don't or won't. When your mind sharpens, your awareness expands beyond the obvious. You start picking up on the subtext, the unspoken motives, the invisible power dynamics in every conversation, every relationship, every structure around you. Nothing remains surface level anymore. Everything becomes layered, complex, and often uncomfortable. You begin to see how much of life is constructed around illusions. The rules people follow are rarely questioned. The goals they chase often aren't their own. You recognize the subtle manipulations in advertising, the emotional games in relationships, the psychological traps built into society. And once you become aware of these things, there's no going back. You can't unsee the dysfunction in what others accept as normal. That awareness separates you, not physically, but mentally. It puts a wall between you and the rest of the world. There's a kind of grief that comes with seeing too much. You grieve the innocence you once had, the blind comfort of not knowing. You miss the simplicity of just existing without overthinking every interaction, every choice, every system. Awareness forces you to confront harsh truths. You see suffering where others see entertainment. You recognize manipulation where others see charm. You detect hypocrisy in places others see leadership. You become the one who sees the cracks in the mask, and that changes how you move through the world. You also become painfully aware of your own flaws. Intelligence doesn't just look outward. It turns inward with even more intensity. You examine your thoughts, your emotions, your habits, and your beliefs. And what you find isn't always pretty. You see your contradictions. You become hyper-aware of your failures, your projections, your fears. Self-awareness can be a double-edged sword. It allows growth, but it also creates inner conflict. You begin to overanalyze, to spiral, to question everything, including yourself. Peace becomes a challenge when your mind is constantly dissecting reality. This level of perception also creates distance in relationships. You see what people are hiding. You detect insincerity in their tone, insecurity in their jokes, envy in their compliments. And though you may never confront it, it changes how you feel around them. You learn to keep your thoughts to yourself, because most people don't want to hear the truth. They want comfort, validation, simplicity. Your intelligence becomes intimidating. Your awareness becomes isolating. People start to misunderstand you, not because you're unclear, but because your clarity threatens the illusions they depend on. You may long for connection, but find that your mind has outgrown the environments that once nurtured it. You're surrounded by noise, yet starving for meaning. You observe everything, but engage less, not because you think you're above others, but because you can't pretend anymore. There comes a moment when the need for external validation begins to lose its grip on you. It happens gradually, like a fog lifting. At first you may still crave acceptance, approval or recognition from the crowd, but the more you pursue truth, the raw, unfiltered kind, the more you realize how often the crowd resists it. The crowd wants comfort, not clarity. It wants to feel good, not face reality. And when you begin to truly value truth, you start walking away from places where truth is unwelcome. You begin to notice how groupthink operates, how easily people trade critical thinking for belonging, how quickly truth is sacrificed to avoid discomfort. Most people conform not because they believe in what they're doing, but because they fear standing alone. When you see this, you understand that truth and popularity rarely coexist. The truth often makes people uncomfortable, and discomfort leads to rejection. So when you commit to the truth, you accept that you might have to walk alone. You also realize that the crowd doesn't just resist truth, it often punishes those who speak it. The moment you point out an inconvenient fact or question a widely held belief, you're labeled as negative, arrogant, or rebellious. It's not that the truth is wrong, it's that it threatens the illusion the crowd depends on. And when the illusion is threatened, the crowd turns defensive. The more honest you become, the more resistance you face. And in that resistance, you begin to find peace in solitude. Truth creates inner alignment. It's no longer about fitting in. It's about living in integrity with what you know. You stop nodding along to lies just to keep the peace. You stop silencing your thoughts to protect fragile egos. You stop performing a version of yourself just to be liked. And when you stop doing these things, the crowd starts to fade. The spaces you used to force yourself into no longer feel necessary. The company you once kept begins to feel empty. You don't hate them, but you no longer need them. You start finding value in fewer, deeper connections. People who don't flinch at honesty, people who ask hard questions, not just easy ones. People who don't fear being wrong. You begin to seek quality over quantity, presence over performance, depth over dopamine. That shift is subtle, but powerful. It redefines your social life, your goals, even your identity. You don't isolate yourself because you're bitter. You pull away because you've stopped lying to yourself. The crowd moves fast, driven by impulse and emotion, but truth moves differently. It's slower, quieter, and far less crowded, and when you choose it, you realize how much noise you were drowning in before. There is a fundamental difference between living to feel good and living to understand. Most people move through life chasing comfort, emotional, physical, social. They want security, routine, and certainty. They avoid discomfort at all costs, even if it means lying to themselves. Comfort is the reward they chase, the drug they depend on. It tells them they're okay even when they're not. It silences doubt, numbs fear, and hides the truth beneath a layer of distraction. But clarity doesn't care about how you feel. It doesn't offer ease, it offers truth, and truth often hurts. When you begin to seek clarity, you start asking the questions that most people avoid. You question your beliefs, your patterns, your past, and your place in the world. You want to know what's real, not what's convenient. And this search leads you away from comfort. Because clarity demands you face the parts of yourself that are hard to look at. The insecurities, the lies you've told yourself, the roles you've played to be accepted. It pulls you into discomfort, so you can dismantle illusion. While others distract themselves with entertainment, noise, and busyness, you begin to sit in silence. You turn inward. You examine your motives. You become brutally honest with yourself. And that honesty can be painful. It might strip you of old identities. It might alienate you from people who still live in denial. But the trade-off is vision. You see things for what they are, not what you want them to be. And with that vision comes power. Comfort makes people stagnant. They stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, and lifestyles that kill their potential. They tell themselves it's fine, that they're happy. But deep down, many are suffocating under the weight of unspoken truths. Clarity, on the other hand, disrupts this fake peace. It forces decisions. It demands movement. It makes staying the same unbearable. When you seek clarity, you're constantly evolving, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. The more clarity you gain, the more alone you might feel, because comfort is a language most people speak fluently. They bond over it, defend it, and worship it. Clarity sounds foreign, even threatening. It challenges everything they're trying to protect. And when you bring clarity into comfortable spaces, it's often rejected, not because it's wrong, but because it's unwelcome. So, you learn to carry it quietly. You stop trying to wake people up, and instead focus on staying awake yourself. To seek clarity is to choose growth over ease. It's to choose uncomfortable truths over pretty lies. It's to walk into the fire, knowing it will burn away everything false. And while that path may cost you comfort, it gives you something far more valuable, an unshakable sense of reality that no illusion can replace. When your mind starts craving depth, surface-level conversations begin to feel like noise. You sit in rooms filled with chatter, jokes, weather updates, recycled opinions, and you feel your energy draining. It's not that you're antisocial or arrogant, it's that your mind is searching for meaning, while most people are simply filling silence. Small talk to you isn't harmless. It's a barrier, a thin layer of politeness stretched over what could be something real but rarely is. You find yourself zoning out in conversations. People talk about their weekend plans, celebrity gossip, or something they saw online, and you nod along, but internally, you're somewhere else. You're thinking about why people fear silence, why they avoid vulnerability, why connection feels so rare when communication is everywhere. You wonder if anyone else notices the emptiness, if anyone else is dying to talk about something real, but is too afraid to be the first one to go deep. At some point you stop faking interest. The forced smiles, the scripted replies, they become harder to maintain. You start to withdraw from conversations that offer nothing but noise. You'd rather be silent than pretend. You'd rather sit alone with your thoughts than stretch yourself thin, trying to fit into conversations that don't feed your soul. What once felt like socializing now feels like performing, and the performance is exhausting. You begin to see how small talk is often used as a shield. People talk about nothing because they're scared of everything, scared to open up, scared to be misunderstood, scared to be seen. Real conversation requires presence, honesty, vulnerability, and most people aren't ready for that. They've built lives around avoidance, around safety, around keeping it light. And when you show up with intensity, with truth, with curiosity, you disrupt that balance. You feel it in their discomfort. You see it in their eyes when your questions go deeper than they expected. And that's when you realize how rare real connection truly is. You start searching for people who skip the surface, the ones who don't flinch when the conversation gets uncomfortable, the ones who ask why instead of just what. These people are few, but they exist, and when you find them, it feels like breathing for the first time after being underwater. It feels like coming home. Until then, though, the loneliness lingers. Not because you're alone, but because you're surrounded by people who don't speak your language. Small talk isn't just boring. It becomes unbearable because you know what's possible beyond it. You've tasted deep, honest, soul-shaking conversations. You've had moments where time disappeared, where minds met, where truth was shared without fear. And once you've experienced that, everything else feels like pretending. You're not asking for constant intensity. You're just looking for something real, something honest, something alive. Because anything less feels like wasting your voice. And so, intelligence doesn't isolate you because you're difficult to be around. It isolates you because you can no longer lie to yourself just to belong. You've traded comfort for clarity, popularity for peace, noise for depth. You've stopped chasing the crowd because you saw where it was going, and it wasn't somewhere you wanted to end up. You see what others don't. You feel what others suppress. And while that level of awareness sets you apart, it also sets you free. Yes, the path is quieter. Yes, it's lonelier, but it's real. And when you finally accept that solitude isn't a punishment, but a sign, you stop resisting the silence. Because in that silence, you hear the only voice that matters, your own. This is not the end of your isolation. This is the beginning of your awakening.